Sheriff. Thank you for sitting down with me today. Earlier this week, you stood in front of a crowd at the listening session. You said you will not step down, you will not resign. Since then, we heard from the community at that listening session, multiple people calling on you to step down. We've also heard 2 county board members now officially publicly call for your resignation. Do you stand by your statements from Monday night?
Absolutely. So when it comes to the county board members, those are individuals I've worked with very closely throughout my career, and I believe that's just partisan politics. The reaction Monday night was certainly from the community that's hurting, and I understand that. And I was elected to lead this office through good times and bad, and this is certainly a bad time. And it would be dereliction of my duties to abandon the sheriff's office right now when they need me more than ever, so I will not resign.
What about the activists, the community members, even the members of Sonya Massey's family that have called and said that the steps that were taken to put Sean Grayson in that position were part of the problem and should be addressed as a part of this, meaning you at the head of the department?
Well, nothing in his background, nothing in any of his testing, evaluations, anything at all would have led us to believe that he would snap the way he did. He acted outside the scope of his authority, our policies and procedures, and the law. And I think it's impossible to predict human behavior, but there's absolutely nothing in his background that would decertify him from working in law enforcement. The state of Illinois State Training and Standards Board had certified him 6 times over and over and over again to continue working in law enforcement. There was nothing that we could have predicted, and we are baffled and stunned and horrified by what he did, and this is on him and him alone.
You mentioned he had nothing in his background for that record. In the past few weeks, we've received records from prior law enforcement jobs, mostly in Logan County, the job he had immediately before this one. His record, through a FOIA request that was received in 5 days, and we got the information back. There were audio recordings of his superior officers questioning him towards the end of his time there at Logan County, why he was still even employed there. And then shortly after, he gets hired at Sangamon County. And just from the perspective of Sangamon County being, the largest county in central Illinois and north of the Metro East, and, the standard that would be expected at a sheriff's department of this size, does that show that you did enough due diligence in his hiring, that those records were, while they might not have been in his initial application, were accessible through relatively convenient means?
We don't FOIA any agency at all. We rely on professional courtesy, that when we call and we ask questions about a potential applicant, that they're truthful with us and they give us any documents that would help us decide whether or not they should be employed here or not. Unfortunately, we did not receive those from Logan County.
Are you going to FOIA now?
Well, I think that all the information is out there, but certainly we're going to take a deeper dive into what else could be, but it's an ongoing process.
I guess I'll rephrase that question. Are you going to be making the hiring process and the vetting process for your officers more in-depth?
It has been discussed, because if we can't rely on another agency to give us all the information, we have to file a FOIA request. Maybe that's the easiest thing for everybody, and if everybody in the state does the same thing, then nobody would be offended by it. But I will work with, whether it's the State Training and Standards Board, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, to figure out maybe there's a better way that we can do this, and maybe FOIA is the right way to do it. So it's something that we'll have to take a look at.
There's been calls for that deeper hiring process, reform to that hiring process. At this point, are you on board with those discussions to that point where this isn't beyond just the regular actions of a sheriff's department, but the regulation at a higher level?
I think it's important that we know the entire background of an individual in any line of work, especially law enforcement though, and I will work with these agencies and figure out what is the best process moving forward to make sure we get all this information.
The process of hiring him, you released his personnel record last night, and in that you also included a statement where you talked about how much credence you put towards the statements, the references given in these documents. One of the references on his application was from a longtime Sheriff's Deputy Scott Butterfield here at the department. He was here for over 20 years. He was set to become Grayson's father-in-law in October. Did you put too much credence in that specific reference?
Not too much credence. We look at all the references, and certainly I've been here my entire life. I've been in law enforcement over 30 years. I get this a lot where I know somebody, and maybe an applicant purposely puts somebody down that they know is connected to the sheriff's office, because references are there to try to help out the individual. So, but we vet all of them. We call all the references, and certainly having worked with Scott for all those years, I did believe in that, like I would anybody that I knew. For any position, a records clerk, I would do the same thing. I do give some weight to that. So, but it's the same process for everybody, and it gave him no edge up. When I know somebody like that, if they call me about it, I'll say, we'll give them an interview, but it will be no different from that person than somebody else.
But does that, you say it gives no edge, but does it go a ways in maybe setting aside some of the other issues that were popping up in his, I know you addressed the multiple police departments in 4 years before he started working here. He also had the 2 DUIs. Some of his training scores in that personnel file you released last night, his cognitive exam said that he scored low in that particular one. He needs time to make certain decisions. It's been pointed out by more than just me that there were some flags popping up in this. Does a reference like that, it may not give an edge, but does it set aside those kinds of other issues that may pop up in an application?
No.
It doesn't at all with it when you say yourself that you put more credence in this.
Well, it's yes, it means something, but it doesn't give them an edge as far as, it may give me confidence. And I don't know if that's the same as edge to you, but we look at everybody the same way. If I wonder about somebody, and I'm not sure if they're a good applicant, but there is a connection, it may be something that I may be making another phone call, but it's not anything that gave him an advantage over somebody else. I'm looking for the best people. And if my best friend in the world sends me his nephew, and that person is not capable of working here, then we're not going to hire him.
But you felt like Sean Grayson was capable of working in this department?
His background had everything that he needed. He had all the training he needed. He had references, and he was not. There was nothing in his background that would decertify him as a police officer. He had been certified 6 times in the state of Illinois under their standards, even under the Safety Act, which expanded the number of decertifying convictions to still work here in Illinois. So when you put all that together, I had confidence that he would be fine here.
Going into what you just talked about, there's been reforms when it comes to law enforcement hiring. You pointed this out in your statement again last night. You said standards for employment in law enforcement have evolved over time. You mentioned to expand the diversity in these sheriff's departments. Is that specifically applying to DUIs? Because I think when we talk about expanding diversity in law enforcement ranks, I don't know if they're specifically talking about, Sean Grayson in that specific, when you talk about his demographics, I guess.
Well, we're looking for applicants, and we talk about the expansion. If it's in diversity as far as your employees, we're constantly looking for all walks of life. I think the sheriff's office should reflect the community. And we've never stopped trying that, but we can't force people to apply here. So we know that we received less applications because of maybe a narrative that people don't want to work in law enforcement anymore. That really doesn't make any sense to us because it's good pay, good benefits, and but yet we're receiving a lot less applicants. I'm not sure why that is.
But to go off of that narrative, we've talked about this narrative before. I've interviewed you before. We've had these discussions around why people don't want to work in law enforcement. Does an instance like this not hurt that trust in the institution itself and hurt a person's willingness to get into this field?
It may. I don't want to speculate too much, but when the facts of the case all come out, and some of the rumors that are flying out there are simply not true, it should help alleviate some of that. But the fact is that we train people, and Sean Grayson had more than double the training most people get.